Wetlands. Our part of Wisconsin was once abundant with these soggy natural features. Covering the state for 10 million acres, they now have been reduced to just half of that. Making room for farming and industrialization, wetlands were once thought of as land in need of developing, even wastelands. We are now only finding out just how valuable they really are.
I'll be right there. Hold on. Wait. I got a clipboard.
It means I'm smart.
Cool. But what exactly are wetlands? Well, it's in the name. It's where land and water exist together as one. It's land that is wet. So, I mean, unlike a lake that can be very deep and be filled with water all year round, a wetland is much shallower. It's a lowland that has water from anywhere from a few inches up to a couple of feet. They're not very deep. And not all wetlands are the same. There's marshes and bogs, fens, swamps. They're all classified as different things. Mequon Nature Preserve has over 30 acres of wetlands. And although we don't have all the different types, we do have a few, and I think we should go, take a closer look at them.
Not all wetlands are the same. It's a term that encompasses a variety of habitats that all share a common theme: land and water. The area that I'm in right now might be a little bit windy, unlike here where there's lots of trees to block the wind. Right now, I'm in the middle of a marsh.
In the middle of a prairie!
Marshes are dominated by herbaceous plants, and herbaceous plants are non-woody plants. Or to simplify it even more, no trees. Marshes are full of grasses, reeds, and beautiful rushes instead. Behind me is Mequon Nature Preserve's Painted Pond. Painted Pond can be considered a marsh. This beautiful wetland can hold up to 1 million gallons of water alone. Let's go take a closer look at one of its residents.
Now this is a fantastic plant. This right here is known as Cardinal Flower. And it's not named after the red bird that you might see in Wisconsin. It's actually, its deep red petals are named after the red robes that Catholic cardinals would wear. There's not a lot of native red flowers in Wisconsin, and very few can compete with this one's appearance. It's just a vividly stunning flower. And it's right at home here at Painted Pond because their roots need to have ground that's always wet, and they also prefer to have lots and lots of sunlight. If this was in a forested area where there's, oh, look at this moth, that's kind of cool. If this was growing in a forested area that was, there's lots of shade, it might still grow, but it's a lot happier here at this marsh where it's not asked to share the sunlight. One more neat thing about this plant is that it relies solely on hummingbirds to pollinate them. Without those little birds, this plant would not be able to reproduce.
Not surprisingly, as we were filming this, we had a ruby-throated hummingbird fly right over us. They're the only species here in Wisconsin that's native and regularly seen. And as you can see from their speed, they're not exactly easy to film. Now here's an area with just a little bit less wind. I am at Pat's Pond in Harvey's Woods, and Pat's Pond could be considered a swamp. If what makes a marsh is the absence of trees, then what makes a swamp is, you might have guessed it, trees. Trees. Trees make a swamp. Marshes have more grass. Pat's Pond is also what's known as an ephemeral wetland. An ephemeral pond essentially does not have permanently standing water year-round. Or in other words, at some point it dries up for a while. This has created a unique ecosystem for all the species that live here and who have adapted to the coming and going of the H2O. This right here is a salamander, or more specifically a tiger salamander. They are an amphibian, meaning they are related to frogs. So you might know as a frog develops, they start out as a tadpole underwater, and they use gills to breathe in the water. And then as they grow up to be adults, they grow legs and lungs and they breathe air. Salamanders are the same way. And Pat's Pond is a really good habitat for them because it dries up. So the tadpole version of salamanders are known as larvae, and they're not the toughest creature in the pond. They are easy prey for creatures such as bullfrogs, fish, even crayfish. All of those species, though, prefer to have permanent standing water. I don't have to explain to you why a fish needs water, but bullfrogs, when they're a tadpole, it takes multiple seasons to become an adult. And so if the pond dries up, that's what keeps their numbers in check, and they wouldn't be able to survive. And on top of that, the crayfish, too, would much prefer to be in water. They're a lot more mobile in water. So if we have a pond that dries up, all of those predators are going to have a lot harder time dominating it. And that's exactly why the salamanders like to live in that pond, because it gives them a better fighting chance.
Bogs and fens are a bit different. They form something known as peat. Peat looks a lot like soil, but it's actually halfway decomposed plant matter. And this builds up and compacts over time for hundreds, even thousands of years. That's why there aren't any bogs or fens here at Mequon Nature Preserve. Although our job here is to restore the land and help nature return, bogs and fens are not so easily replaced. And because of their unique land and water chemistry, bogs and fens have some very rare species that live there and who have adapted to that type of habitat. Bogs have very low oxygen and they're pretty acidic, whereas fens get their water from the ground, so it's very alkaline. Bogs get all of their water from the rain. There are plenty of parks in Wisconsin that have bogs for you to visit. If you do, make sure to stay on any of the boardwalks that are provided, because you want to be respectful to the land, but also you have to remember you would be walking on land that's on top of water, so it can be a little bit dangerous sometimes, so you always want to be respectful and safe. Wetlands are home to just too many species to talk about individually in this video. But what's important to know is that 1/3 of all endangered species in the US live in wetlands. That's a good enough reason in its own not to fill them in. What if I told you that humans benefit just as much from wetlands? Every so often here in Wisconsin, it rains a lot all at once, and the rivers can't take it away fast enough, so what happens? It floods. And floods can be very damaging, even dangerous. One of the greatest benefits of wetlands is that they absorb floods.
Cohesive Corey here. Do you know water sticks to water? When like molecules are attracted to one another, it's known as cohesion. Cohesion. Hydrogen bonds are weak, and so they break apart easily too. Easy come, easy go. But will quickly reform new bonds. This is what gives water its unique texture. It is also crucial for how living organisms function.
But what's this got to do with wetlands? Well, lands that are already wet will have an easier time grabbing a hold of water that is flowing over it. Think of wetlands as giant sponges that soak up all the floodwater. The removal of wetlands from communities can mean the flooding of homes and streets, because with all that water being deposited, there's just no place for it to go.
As rainwater passes over the land, it picks up and carries things. Some of these things include pollutants, such as chemicals like pesticides, animal waste, excess nutrients from fertilizers, and other nasty things. And they eventually find their way through rivers to a common place, such as Lake Michigan. Since a lot of us get our drinking water, food, and a day at the beach from there, it's best that it stays clean. That's what makes wetlands so great, because before polluted water reaches a river or lake, some of it may pass through a wetland and be purified. Let me show you an example. Welcome to the laboratory. It is here that we will be using the most sophisticated technology ever assembled to explain to you why wetlands can filter water so well. For this experiment, we will be using water, coffee filter, and So what the coffee filter represents in this experiment is all the soil, roots, and plant stems in a wetland that act as a natural filter for the water that passes through it. Now let's do a quick comparison. Here's how the water looked before entering our wetland. And here it is afterwards. If given the choice, which would you prefer entering your source of drinking water? An important thing to remember though is that wetlands can only handle so much pollution, and we shouldn't rely on them to always clean up after us. We should strive to pollute as little as possible.
That's all the time we have for this video, but hopefully now you know that wetlands are not wastelands. They're actually very, very important lands that are wet. They're an important habitat for a whole bunch of different animals. They can help clean water as it passes through, as well as absorb excess rainwater. We'd like to give a big shout out to the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewer District for caring so much about water quality and wetlands that their support made this video happen. How long was that? If you're in love with wetlands now, as you obviously should be, feel free to stop by the Mequon Nature Preserve. We've got over 30 acres of wetlands to explore, and we're 100% free year-round. Alright, that's all I got for now. If your teacher has assigned you part 2, which is in the description, that's where your worksheet will come in handy. So feel free to go down to the description and click on that video for our second part, where we'll actually do a biotic indexing of the pond. So I'll see you there.